Hey guys, my name is G. Welcome back to our Heritage Group channel. We're here today on another Meeting the Driver episode. We're going to be sitting with Rob and he's going to tell us what his perfect two-car solution is. Before we get into that, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.
All right, sound check, 1 2 1 2. So my name's Rob. You can probably tell I'm Australian. Been living here now for about 5 years. I work as an anesthesiologist for UC Davis, yeah, that's pretty much me. I mean, cars have always been like a way just to get around. I grew up in Australia in a surfing town and just needed a car that could fit a surfboard. And the first car I actually got ended up kind of accidentally birthing me into cars, which was an AE86 Corolla. So I bought it off this girl, and she didn't know what she was selling. I didn't know what I was buying until I had this like really fun, well-balanced car that you could chuck into corners that still fitted stuff in it. And then all of a sudden, over like the next like year or two, people would start leaving notes on my windshield, and they were like asking to buy my car and asking me, and I didn't really understand it. And then I got into like a little bit more like doing some DIY mechanics, and then the car scene kind of followed from there. And then I realized what I had, and I ended up selling it to this guy a couple of years later, and he did a bare metal restoration, like a ground up rebuild, and turned it into like an absolute drift machine. So that was really exciting. And then from there, I kind of just did that pretty natural progression of like WRX wagon, then I tuned that until you could pretty much not tune it anymore. Then I went to an Audi RS4 Avant, and then I came over here and went TTRS, and then into the Porsches. So each car kind of has like a fairly defined purpose, I guess. So when I moved over here, all of a sudden tracking cars became way more accessible. So the cost back home and the logistics back home were always pretty prohibitive. And then all of a sudden within a half-day drive of Sacramento, you got 3 world-class tracks. You got Laguna Seca, you've got Sonoma, and you've got Thunderhill. And that was it. Then the track bug bit pretty hard. At the time I had a 2018 TTRS, which was really fun in a straight line. But a little bit, you know, like the computers just made you look really good. So you chuck it into a corner, the computers do their thing, and you just look like a hero. And then after a while, I just wanted something a little more analog. So I bought a 997.1 Carrera S, and then the mod bug bit pretty hard. And so next thing I'm doing sway bars, coilovers, transmission linkages, engine stuff. And then I realized that I was going to be pretty much into that car for what a GT3 was going to cost me. So that was the natural progression. And so then I ended up with a car that's kind of, you know, doesn't make any apologies. It's a track car, that's what it does. So it's going to have stone chips, and it's going to get, you know, beaten on pretty hard. And so you can drive that thing 80 miles to the track, beat on it all day, and then drive it home, you know, and put it away. Never misses a beat. But it's a terrible family car. So I needed something with 4 seats, and I have a very, very understanding wife, and I can fit 2 kids in the back. And so this came along at the right time, and it was another relative bargain. So the white GT3 was pretty unloved for a while. It was pre-pandemic, and it sat on a lot at a Porsche dealership in Monterey, and it's got high miles. It obviously had some track time, and I feel like a lot of the purists weren't that interested in it because it's probably not going to be a collector car. It's going to be a driver car. And so at the time, it didn't really represent a great ROI, but I think that's probably changed a little bit since. I went out, checked it out, drove it, realized that the GT3 is far more than the sum of its parts. Like, it's a completely different animal to like a Carrera S. And got a PPI checked out. The DME's clean, it's got a good service history, so that followed, and you know, I got into that car for under 70k, which is, you know, pretty bonkers in today's market. And then you know, I can work on it myself. I do all of the servicing, you know, brake rebuilds, all the fluids, everything's just done in the garage with YouTube. And so that's how I came about that one. This one I'd been searching for. I've loved the 456 since it was featured in a 1995 movie called Ronin. And there's a scene in Ronin where they pull up to this casino in the south of France, and there's a 456 in the casino driveway. I'm like, man, I must have that car. And these cars themselves have got some really cool features. You know, this was the last car that Enzo ever signed off on before he died. It's the last Ferrari with pop-up headlights. It's got the biggest single piece of carbon fiber ever used at the time on the hood. It's the fastest four-seater in the world. The suspension was set up by Schumacher around the Fiorano test track. And I mean, you can, to buy into that history and that kind of story for, again, like under $100,000, I mean, why not, right? Hang on to it for a couple of years, see what happens. And so, yeah, that was an off-market purchase from a guy on one of the forums. And the PPI was the 500-mile drive from LA to Sacramento. All it needs is gas. Never, I mean, you know, touch wood, never get a check engine light. All the things that you hear about Ferraris, about them being fickle and, you know, all of the maintenance problems, nothing. The more you drive it, the better this thing gets. That's my biggest problem, is putting miles on it. This one is essentially stock. It's going to have a couple of mods done to it. These left the factory with a central resonator, which made it sound a little bit weak. And so I've deleted the central resonator, which from 2003 onwards, they left the factory like that anyway. So Ferrari obviously knew that it was something that they wanted to do. So the resonator's out. In the pipelines for this is a set of aftermarket wheels. The 17s look a little dated, and you get the wheel gap. And so I'm either going to go with a set of 18s or 19s OEM Ferrari, for something like from a 575, and then lower the car just a touch. It's on coilovers, so it's a pretty easy job just to lower it just a touch, but I still want to retain the clearance and the convenience of not scraping things. And then otherwise, all this thing is going to need is just, again, DIY maintenance, and I'll be happy for here on in. The happiest thing about this car is that it loves to be driven. So the more I drive it, the better it gets. And so no oil leaks, you know, no smoking, none of those things you hear about, all the things that scare you, like the valve guides going bad. You know, the more you drive it, the better it is. I think I'm the first guy to put people in the back seat. I think the seats had never been sat in when I bought it, and the kids wanted to know why there was an ashtray in the back, and they were like 5 and 3, and they're in there like flipping stuff open, and I've driven it in the rain. I'll come out and just say that. Like, I drove it with my wife out to Half Moon Bay, and I think I was the first guy to ever use the windshield wipers as well. I called the owner, and I from LA are still on very good terms, and we talk pretty often. And I was asking him about what wiper blades to put on. He's like, oh man, he's like, I never used the wipers or the lights. So I think he did 700 miles in 5 years, and I've done 2,000 miles so far, and I've only had it 6 months. So I mean, you can daily it, and sometimes, you know, we almost do. My wife will jump in it. She'll take the kids to school, which is always a bit of a head scratcher when you show up in the Ferrari and you're bundling the back, the seats out of, you know, kids out of the back seat, and my only hard and fast rule is that they don't eat and drink in the back, and that's it. And it does miles and miles and miles. So it's probably my best story. And the other great thing about this car is that no one knows what it is. You can park it anywhere, and you barely get a second look unless someone knows what it is, and then they want to come up and talk to you about it. So, and that's really cool. It's one of those, if you know what it is, then yeah, it's great. I think Carlos and I both talked about the idea. I think if I could put something else in the garage, oftentimes over a barbecue and some beers, we'll talk about like what our ultimate 5-car garage would be. Pretty much the other cars now are sort of pretty stratospherically priced, and so they'd be almost out of reach. I would not say no to a 355. I think both of us have got that high on our radar, and I would even go for like the quote-unquote unloved 355 with an F1. I think a well-sorted F1 will still give you almost as much fun for, you know, a huge difference in price. So we'll see what the future holds. But I mean, right now I'm already squeezing the wife out onto the street parking, so I think another car might be a bridge too far, but we'll see.
All right, that concludes today's Meeting the Driver episode, again with Rob. Thank you so much for inviting us over.
Thanks for coming and checking it out. It's great.
Of course. We love both of your cars. Super underrated and very beautiful Ferrari you have here.
Yeah.
And of course, the all-time favorite GT3. And hopefully we'll be back soon to film your F355.
Oh yeah, I know. That's right. Never say never, huh? For sure.
Awesome.
Thanks, G.
If you guys like our content, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.